Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics. Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Fred Schenkelberg.
Hey, Fred, and this is Carl Carlson.
Hey, Carl. Hey, I understand I saw a message go through the other day that might actually be a good topic.
Yeah, I haven't got a lot of people, and I encourage people to speak up and to write me with any comments or questions on the new series that I have on the key elements of effective teaching. And it's a teaching series, but I've said in every article that I write, I said it applies to life because you're always either one-on-one, often, not always, often in the position of trying to convey knowledge to someone else.
Well, it works if you're running a meeting, if you're facilitating an FMEA, if you're teaching a class, if you're doing just a discussion and they ask you a question, what is FMEA? You're in a teaching moment. We do it all the time.
Yeah. And so it is so good to know and to ponder what are the key elements of being effective in those teaching moments. And I think it's number 9 in the series, or number 8, is the pace of teaching. And the reason I caught up that one and as a key element is I have sat through many courses or many teaching sessions where they run out of time.
Presentations at a conference. Good grief. That's a case study on how to not manage your time.
And the instructor or the presenter says, all right, I'm running a little short, so I'm just going to flip through these slides and we'll get through it. And what a waste. And then you don't have time for questions.
Yep.
Have you ever been in a presentation or a course where you just run out of time and you don't have time to ask questions? That kind of thing, I think, is what I call a key element to avoid that. You want to keep your pace. And I started the article with, I would rather you teach more effectively, but less content, but make it effective, that you're actually reaching people, then try to teach too much and then it goes over people's heads or there's no time for interactivity.
Yeah, there was one tutorial at Rams I went to once and she had like 3 college, graduate level courses worth of material in the 2 hours. And she talked so fast. It was ripping through this material. And then there's I was exhausted just trying to keep up. And I knew most of that stuff. I was like, oh my God, cut that down by a third and actually teach it rather than flipping the pages in the entire textbook. It really is not helpful. The other side of that is the pace. You can go too slow the whole time and one, never finish, but you also put everybody to sleep. Pacing has got all kinds of things, but I think you're more talking about is trying to cram too much information into it and just not.
You bring up a great point, Fred. We should really explore both sides of it because yes, you can go too fast. You can try to get too much material in, but also you can drone on and lose people. And part of this is is the pace of teaching, but inherent in the discussion is you have to maintain interactivity with your audience. And so the pace assumes in the discussion, I think the right way to discuss it is you have to assume that you're going to allow and
encourage
gender and encourage interactivity. Because you can cram a lot of stuff in there if you just tune the audience out.
Yep. Yeah, no, I get that. It's part of to me, it became really stark when I was invited to teach in China at a university class there. And after the first hour, I was talking to my advisor, my coworker that was from the university, and I said, well, how come I'm not getting any questions? Usually I want to get a lot of questions right up front to make sure that's built into the course and it's okay and all that stuff. No, they'll never ask questions. That's an insult to your teaching. And like, huh?
Yeah,
so,
right.
so I had to go create a whole bunch more material because I was going for the 2 weeks I was there, I was going to easily run out of material because I typically plan for an hour block would have 20 to 40 minutes of content with plenty of times for discussion, for Q&A, for what ifs, for what do you think of this? What's the next step? I tend to design it that way on purpose so that I have that interaction and engagement and it's part me checking on, is this making sense? Do we need to go over anything? But it's also part of help people get into the material to pay attention and engage with it because it's not just me yammering away at them. They could read a textbook for all that does for them.
It comes down to what's the purpose of teaching or conversation or facilitating and or presenting, put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that purpose is to convey knowledge. It's just not like you say, it's just not to ramble on. That's not the purpose. The purpose is not to get through the material. The purpose is to convey knowledge.
Yeah, and that's hard to do if you're not checking, if you're not listening, if you're not actively checking in with your team or your group. Is this working? Are you getting it? Or the issues or problems or whatever. And sometimes you get one of those just $1 million question, and then the rest of the material for that segment's gone. You got to make it up somewhere else if you even need to get to it, because somebody asks the question and the whole class sits forward looking for what's the answer going to be, like, oh, this one's pretty interesting. Let's dive into it. So what do you think? How's this approach? What do you go into it, and now it's a full on discussion with a fully engaged group. And it's like, that's gold if you're trying to teach something.
That's what you want. And if you don't have time for that, if you don't bake in time for that spontaneity, that interactivity, then you're just not pacing your class correctly. Now, let me ask you, Fred, there's no preparation here. In other words, Fred and I didn't talk about this ahead of time. So what do you think the percent, if you were to say a certain amount of teaching or presentation is tell, and a certain amount is interactivity, where they ask questions, or there's exercises, or there's discussion, what percent of the presentation or teaching is tell versus what percent is everything else of interactivity of some kind?
There was, I'm trying to think of who did the study. And I was doing a whole bunch of stuff years ago about online education. And I remember one of the things they researched is that the screen has to change like every 3 seconds. Something the cursor moves or the slide changes somehow, or the tint changes or something changes is a way to maintain attention. Yet in those same kind of studies, they were always looking at, well, what do we change with the effect with retention, not just short-term retention, but long-term retention. And there's a place for patterns and it's sort of like when you're talking live to somebody, you have certain gestures to signal you want questions, or other questions to bring their attention to a feature on a graphic or something like that. There's things we do by habit, by convention, whatever, to aid in the transfer or in the communication. Yet one of them I don't remember, it was 50-50 or 1/3 tell and 2/3 interact. Yet it was a very high percentage. And I don't always achieve that by any means. I try, but in the better events and better classes and stuff, it's usually very, very high.
Well, very, very good. And I agree with you completely there. And there's something that, in terms of interactivity, I'd love to hear from people on this. I'm thinking 60-40 or 2/3 interactivity, 1/3 tell. It's more than 50% interactivity, well over.
I remember talking about it years ago. I just remember this. I don't remember who I was talking to. He says, well, that sounds like kindergarten. He says, everything I need to know, I learned in kindergarten. There's a book about that, I think.
It doesn't sound like college and some of the courses that I
Oh,
remember.
geez, no. We had
And
one
the
guy.
instructor's droning on and on and on, and I'm tuned out totally.
Well, we
This is
did.
before you had cell phones, so you had to, your mind just went somewhere else.
Yeah. Oh, no. I was in an electrical engineering class, and this professor came in, and he didn't acknowledge we existed at all, ever. He came in, put his book down, started writing, and it was one of those, chalkboards that flipped up and down and back and forth, and he could fill up like 8 chalkboards easily within an hour, and we're just writing and writing and writing, because it's all stuff that later we'll have to go figure out what the hell it means, Yeah. So one day he came in, and we'd heard about it. It was the only demonstration of anything other than him writing down derivations and notes and stuff like that. He had a black box on the desk, had a light bulb on the top, and there was a button next to it. And he came in, and this is the demonstration. When you push the button, the light comes on. And so we knew that was coming. And so we had a couple of minutes before he walked in, and we said, as soon as he hits that button, we all stand up and cheer wildly, like we just scored a touchdown in the game, something like that. And so we did that. The whole class just stood up and cheered and waved and everything else. And he looked at us for the first time. He actually made eye contact with some of us.
Wow.
And then walked out of the room and didn't come back for the rest of the lesson. And then 2 days later, we were back in there, and he came in and started writing on the board like nothing ever happened.
Back to the old habit. Yeah. Well, where does learning occur is what comes to my mind here. And learning does not occur by memorizing. It can help. You got to memorize certain things, but learning occurs when you have the aha moment. Sometimes it occurs when you make a mistake, and then the teacher coaches you through it, or the presenter coaches you through it, or you ask questions where you really don't know the answer, and you're interested. So it's so important to create the environment where learning occurs, and a lot of that learning occurs on interactivity. So I just think this is such an important subject, that you set the pace of your class so that you have time for those learning moments. You have time for good questions. You have time for exercises, and you have time for learning to occur about the messages you're trying to convey.
Yeah, step number one, if you find yourself in a spot where you're rushing through the material at the end of your allotted time, whether at a conference or in a class or wherever, is take out half of that material.
Yes.
It's, if you really only get 4 hours to teach this class, then prepare about 2 hours or so of content. Have the books, have the handouts, have all the other references for people to get, other ways to get all of the details. You don't need to derive the word "the" in every one of your presentations. I'm sorry. Right. You just don't need to do that. Or the history of...
People are surprised at the amount of preparation that I do. Like on a new class or a new client, I will actually create the material or find the material, and I'll present to a wall, or I'll present in my own office as if I'm teaching the class or making the presentation. And I'll have a timer on every slide, and I will make sure that the amount of time that I have allows for more than 50%, well over 50% interactivity. It's not just the amount of time to present the slide. And I practice that until I actually have it very good. And in the last part of my career, I've never had to rush towards the end. And I leave lots of...
Unless you're presenting with somebody else that takes too long, for example.
Well, that's happened.
Yes. But even then, I don't rush. It's like, we're not going to have time for that. What are your questions? And, I have that on 2 slides from now. Here we go. There's bits and pieces of that. Now, it's a continuum. It's not a hard and fast rule. It's one step is to plan for the interaction, plan for the time to have questions or exercises, things like that. That's a luxury you get in your office, right?
Yes.
It's a plan. And if you get into a class and they start asking a bunch of really great questions, go with it. That might be that groups or entities. That's the way they like to learn stuff. And then throw your slides away. You don't have to go through them. That's not required. Some of the very best events I've ever done and been involved in, one was, I didn't know what to expect. We're going in there and we're just trying to figure out, well, what is this issue that you called us in to go talk about? And it was when I was back with Hewlett Packard, and they said, could you guys come in and help us figure out how do we make our product more reliable? And I says, well, what's the issue? So, well, we got to explain that to you. And so they had, 15 people from their team in there, and my boss and I were, right. So what is the problem? And it was kind of like, nobody wanted to start. So I said, all right, so I don't have an agenda. Here's a whiteboard. Let's write down what's on your mind. Just brainstorm. What topics do you want to talk about? And on dealing with making a product more reliable. And we filled the whiteboard up, and a handful of them I can answer really fast. Oh yeah, go over to this place, or here's this chapter in this book, or whatever. And it crossed those out. And then it was like, what is this? And then somebody finally spoke up and got us going with it. But it was a meeting made on the fly. It was basically, well, what do you want to talk about? What questions do you have that while we're here, what can we help you with?
Incredibly valuable.
And it was scheduled for an hour. They ended up bringing in lunch. And we just kept on going. And another time was at you remember the conference that Pontalise used to do? It was the
ARS. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A lot of good food at those things.
That's right.
But you also got like 45 minutes or an hour and a half slots. It wasn't a 20-minute dash kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And that's the one I've told over and over again, is the origin story for No MTBF, is that somebody asked me a question about it just before I got introduced. And as like, does anybody else ever had a problem with this? And everybody in the 150 people raised their hand. And so I just turned off my laptop. I wasn't going to use it. I don't even remember what I was going to talk about, and got a whiteboard or a butcher paper or whatever was in the room. And we filled it with all these conundrums of how people don't understand MTBF. And the folks from Reliasoft that were kind of organizing the thing was like, well, you're supposed to be talking about, where's your slides? They were pacing back and forth and fretting and everything else. And they finally, about 10 minutes into it, they settled down and joined the discussion. It was magic. There's a whole lot more interest in this topic than they happen to trade off being here or there to be in one presentation or another. And it's like, all right, we're going to talk about this. It's just so important what you're bringing up here. And I know we're going to run into time here on the podcast in a second, but let me just explore this with you for a minute. And I'll use the analogy of mining, where there's a thread or the gold is a certain way. The vein of gold, yeah. The vein of gold, that kind of thing. Once you're onto that, and let me shift it back to teaching. When the subject is on fundamentals, not style or other things, format, but it's on raw principles and fundamentals, I will add time and find time somewhere else. So when the discussion turns to something that's very fundamental or that's part of your teaching, you have to be careful not to rush it. And so, like Fred, like you brought up, if a relevant question comes in that affects or hits on the fundamentals, take the time and shave off time somewhere else if you have to. So I have many times shifted gears because someone's bringing up something that's really important that hits the fundamentals, and you want to explore it, and you just do. You put your planning and your preparation can take a back step a little bit, and you really make sure that those fundamentals are taught. And then if you have to, you shave off somewhere else. So that's an exception to the pace of teaching, because you want to advocate for fundamentals. Very, very important. Yeah. I've even, in cases, I look at it this way, is that, well, we won't do, a small group exercise later. It's already built into the program. If it's more than an hour, it's already built in that there's spots I can go, well, we can skip that, or you can do that on your own, let me know. the other piece is, what do you do after the class or the seminar or the workshop or the presentation? I think gets completely overlooked by so many people. And a whole lot of learning really happens after they hear what you got to say or what you're advocating or practicing. It's like, so if I'm teaching somebody,
in person, like they come up to the instructor, or
no. There's
by...
pieces there. There's pieces there, but I'm thinking a week or 2 weeks later.
Yes.
In order for somebody to really change how they facilitate something or how do they plan for a presentation into it, is they actually have to have the opportunity to do that, and it might not be today or tomorrow that they get that chance. I'm thinking of just a basic class on FMEA and a bit on facilitation and stuff like that, and how to be a good participant in one of those things. And we did some mock ones in class, and in this session that we did and practiced and demonstrated and demoed and had our interactions that way. But in the class, it was also, I'm going to call you in 2 weeks and ask how it's going.
Yeah. Because
you're doing this class because you're going to do your own FMEAs over the next 2 weeks. So you all will have the opportunity to participate in FMEAs. This was the prep class, so you're ready for that. So I'm going to email and call you in a couple of weeks and ask how it's going. So the expectation was that I was going to check. Did you apply any of this stuff we're talking about? How did it go? What didn't work? What did work? What did you take away from the class that stuck with you? And so even in a 20-minute presentation at a conference is, the next time you have the opportunity to analyze accelerated life data, consider this. And if you have a question, give me a call or give me a shout. Here's my contact information. I'd love to see how it's working for you. And part of that interaction piece doesn't have to stop at the end of your allotted time.
Exactly, Fred. And this is the subject of another one of the articles in my series, which has to do with commitment. And probably a subject of another podcast, but just to resonate here on this topic with you, is that I think an instructor, presenter, facilitator, you have to be committed to the sharing of knowledge. You have to be committed that students, participants actually interact and receive the knowledge, and that goes beyond the allotted course time.
Yeah.
And that's what you're bringing up. It could be 2 weeks later, a month later. You want your emails to be available. You want to set up times, if appropriate, for follow-up. And that's where the learning occurs. A lot of the learning occurs is
they actually try it.
It's important that as an instructor, you have the commitment to do that.
Yeah. No, it's, the flash and dash, I call it, is where you flash a bunch of slides and you go through the 20 minutes or an hour and then you run out of there. Never want to talk about it again. That doesn't help anybody except fill 20 minutes in the day with nonsense. There's so many ways. There's so many nuances and pieces of this. And it ties into so many things we do. We spend a whole lot of time working with other people, and I would argue not enough time with good data sets, but it's hard to find a good data set.
Yes, indeed. If you're a listener, we'd love to hear from you on this subject. What do you consider to be a good pace of classes you've attended, good pace of presentations? How should it be adjusted? What's your learning on that? Please share your ideas or questions with us.
Yep. You can do that over at accendoreliability.com/go/SOR. And there's a couple of ways to get in touch with us there. Carl and I and the other hosts of the show are available through LinkedIn and our About pages and through contact forms on the site with many of our articles and content there. There's plenty of ways for you to get in touch with us, comment fields and stuff like that. We take a look at all that stuff on a regular basis. Yeah, Carl, when I saw this one come across, I bet you're going to bring that up when next time.
Oh, that's for sure. That's so important. Well, nice discussion, Fred.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. We'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic, that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.